Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Quarantine Collections. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And we're very glad to be bringing you this virtual programming as we're all social distancing to do what we can and play our part in stemming this pandemic. And today I thought that we would explore once again the official and annual reports of the United States Lighthouse Board. The United States Lighthouse Board was established in 1852. It was a 9-member board of professionals that were tasked with facilitating and managing the nation's lighthouses. Previously, the lighthouses and all their operations were facilitated through the U.S. Department of Treasury's 5th Auditor, Stephen Pleasanton. And before Mr. Pleasanton took over, it bounced around in various roles and various bureaucrats, mostly all under the United States Treasury Department. This board professionalized the service and ensured that the service and the decision-making were placed in professionals that understood the plight of mariners, that understood lighthouse technology, and would really propel the lighthouse service forward into a civil service and away from kind of an unprofessionalized backwater government service, if you will. Previously, under the 5th Auditor, decisions were made less about what was in the best interest of mariners and the lighthouse service, and more in the interest of how to save a buck or two. So these Lighthouse annual reports following 1852 are a wonderful primary resource for historians in uncovering the history of these various lighthouse reservations. So today within the Lighthouse Service reports, I thought that we would focus on the construction of Cape Fear Light Station. That was completed in the year 1903. It was a seacoast light that stood near the modern-day campus of the Bald Head Island Conservancy. And its story begins before the Civil War. But before we dive into that, let me check in on Facebook here. I'd love to hear who is listening out there, where you're listening from. Love to hear what your connection to Bald Head Island is. So give us a shout out in the comments there. And if you'd like us to elaborate on something or have a question, I'd love to hear all about that as well. Alrighty. So let's dive in. So how does this story begin before the Civil War? Hey, good morning, Patty. It's great to hear from you from Missouri. How does this story begin before the Civil War? Well, even before the Civil War, Old Baldy was never very good at her job. She was placed poorly on the island, on the western end of the island towards the river, and she was extremely short, with 110 feet tall, a focal plane. It just wasn't going to cut it. It needed to be a little bit higher. And lastly, the lighting apparatus inside was extremely dim and poorly managed. Now, by 1856, Old Baldy received a third-order Fresnel lens, which greatly improved her lighting apparatus, but combined those efforts with its poor position and its shortness in stature, it just still was kind of a thorn in mariners' side in searching for the Cape Fear River, and most importantly, in avoiding the danger of frying pan shoals. These shoals that extend for 20-30 miles off of the pitch of Cape Fear in a southeastern direction into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean act as a giant barrier to shipping, and they serve as a southern terminus in this vast graveyard of the Atlantic that is sunk around about 2,000 ships out there. Good morning, Janie. It's great to hear from you. So, rather than placing a lighthouse on the western end of the island towards the river, the lighthouse needed to be out towards the cape in order to better warn these mariners of frying pan shoals. So William Henry Chase Whiting, a lighthouse engineer, had just completed a lighthouse at Cape Lookout in Beaufort. The modern-day Cape Lookout Lighthouse, with its black and white diamond day markers, was completed in 1859 by this young engineer. And sooner or later, he would find himself in Smithville, modern-day Southport, and Bald Island, where he intended to destroy Old Baldy Lighthouse and place a 150-foot tower in her place with a second-order Fresnel lens. You think that the Fresnel lenses went in sizes or orders, the first being the largest and the most powerful, the sixth being the weakest and the smallest. Old Baldy, or her replacement, was going to receive a second-order lens, so near the higher end of that spectrum. Now, appropriations were made by June of 1860, a congressional appropriation to raise Old Baldy and build this second-order Fresnel lens on a 150-foot tower. Mr. Whiting, he created plans. We have them in our archives. Created plans for this beautiful lighthouse that was going to be brick. It would look very similar to Cape Lookout or modern-day Cape Hatteras without its day markers. And then the American Civil War breaks out less than a year later. And of course, Old Baldy and Bald Island find themselves in a new nation as Confederate States of America. And that young engineer, William Henry Chase Whiting, finds himself a major general in the Confederate armies. By November of 1864, that war would bring Major General Whiting back to Bald Island, back to the lower Cape Fear, in order to defend our shores against the Union Navy and the Union armies. William Henry Chase Whiting would die in that endeavor. So by 1865, when the war ends, we were without that young, bright engineer that sought to destroy Old Baldy. Megan, yay, caught it live. Well, we're very glad that you caught it live, Megan. Welcome. And Chuck from Cleveland, North Carolina. Chuck, good morning to you. And hey, Travis, Ann from Greensboro. Thanks for keeping us entertained during the quarantine, learning a lot about Bald Island. Well, Ann, Megan, Chuck, good morning to you all. Thank you for joining us. And Ann, it is absolutely my pleasure. Us and our team, McCallie and Chris and Abby and Jess, we are very much enjoying keeping you all entertained. And it's keeping us sane too. It's keeping us busy because we're not sure what we would do. So it would take nearly to the end of the 19th century for the Lighthouse service to pick up where William Henry Chase Whiting left off in constructing a 150-foot tower properly placed to warn against the dangers of frying pan shoals. Throughout much of the late 19th century, a following passage I'm going to read to you appears year after year after year in these Lighthouse Service reports. Time after time, they're literally, in our 21st century terminology, copying and pasting what they wrote years before, harking that Congress needs to act. We need a lighthouse on the pitch of Cape Fear. There was not a first-order Fresnel lens, or there was not really an efficient lighthouse from Cape Lookout in our north near modern-day Beaufort, North Carolina, and Cape Romaine in South Carolina. That's a huge stretch of coastline that was unlit with a proper lighthouse. With a giant barrier or shoals, one of the most dangerous areas of the Atlantic seaboard right in the middle. They needed a lighthouse on Cape Fear. So they write time after time, and I have here the 1897 report of the Lighthouse Board, and they are saying that they have made a following statement on the 8 previous annual reports. It says, the shoal forming the continuation of this cape for about 18 miles to the southeast are dreaded by shipmasters only a little bit less than those at Cape Hatteras. At present, a light ship near the outer extremity of the shoals warns vessels of the dangers and gives them a good point of departure. This aid to navigation cannot be dispensed with, but it is not sufficient to ensure the adequate protection to the large number of domestic and foreign vessels attracted to this point by the considerable and increasing trade of the neighboring port of Wilmington, North Carolina. Because of the small area lighted by it, and because of its visibility to be set adrift from its moorings during heavy storms, which is the very time when the light is needed the most. They're talking about frying pan lightship out at the end of the shoals. When it is needed the most in the middle of storms and hurricane, it is often ripped from its anchor and floating away where it's not doing any use. The present Cape Fear light, they're speaking of Old Baldy now, the present Cape Fear light, on account of its inland position and want of height, does not cover the shoal, and therefore does not give sufficient warning to vessels when the lightship may have drifted from her moorings. A first-order lighthouse built on the pitch of Cape Fear with a radius of 18.5 miles of light would be seen so far as to give a timely warning, and the fact near enough to the coast to see it would be a sufficient indication that the observer should make a better offing. Other reasons for a first-order lighthouse may be found in better protection it would afford to the bight lying north of the Cape, which has been left dark since the discontinuation of Federal Point Light Station in 1880. They're talking about East Beach, that entire swath of East Beach, then going up towards Curie Beach, Carolina Beach, Wrightsville Beach. It is dark because when they closed New Inlet near modern-day Fort Fisher in the 1880s and in the early 1890s, when they close up New Inlet with the dams, they discontinue Federal Point Lighthouse in modern-day Fort Fisher. So that entire stretch of East Beach and modern-day Pleasant Island is dark. The proposed light would more than compensate for the one discontinued at Federal Point, or Fort Fisher. It may become proper to add that there is no first-order lighthouse between Cape Lookout, North Carolina, and Cape Remain, South Carolina, a distance of 170 nautical miles. Recent changes in the lighting of the entrance of the Cape Fear River have almost eliminated the Cape Fear Lighthouse as a harbor light. Again, they're speaking of Old Baldy. Its only use is that of a rear beacon to a stake light forming the range to guide ships up the river after crossing the bar. Upon the establishment of the new proposed light and the pitch at Cape Fear, the old light may be discontinued, as the tower and the keeper's dwelling are antiquated and discreditable to the lighthouse establishment. Again, nobody gives Old Baldy a break in these reports. If they're not complaining about her, they're trying to destroy her. If they're not trying to destroy her, they're telling her she's old and ugly. It's the bottom line here. It's not a very good report for her. The keeper's dwelling is antiquated and discreditable to the lighthouse establishment. Well, I think Sonny Dozier, who is the lighthouse keeper here, would very much disagree. Hey, good morning, Kathy from Newville, Pennsylvania. Megan, where did the museum's collections come from? Well, a variety of places, Megan. Some of our collections were purchased by the Old Baldy Foundation. Some collections were donated through a deed of gift through various supporters. Some collections were excavated on the lighthouse grounds in the 1980s by archaeologists. And some of our collections are on loan from the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. You think of the underwater archaeologists at Fort Fisher. So a nice combination of where our museum's collections come from. And you can explore many of these objects on oldbaldy.org that have been digitized. They include in those records online where they came from, whether they're a loan, whether they're a field find, whether they've been a donation, or whether we purchased that collection. That's a great question, Megan. Thank you. So they're listing all the problems. They need a lighthouse. So by 1898, all right, Congress finally acts. They appropriate $35,000 to establish a first-order light on the pitch of Cape Fear, all right? And they say that they are going to exceed that money up to $70,000. We've written you a $35,000 check, And there is still money where that came from, because we will go up to $70,000. So it says, as soon as the proper site can be secured, arrangements will be made for its construction, and it is estimated that an additional $35,000 will be needed to satisfy the contracts given the above authority of that first $35,000. So they're acting by 1898. So go forward the next year in 1899, it says an appropriation for the first order lighthouse to be built on the pitch of Cape Fear, Smith Island, North Carolina, was been made by an act approved on July 1st, 1898. The authority was given to contract the amount not exceeding $70,000, and that they came out here to Bald Head Island in September of 1898, and they selected a site of 20 acres that would be adequate. And not only did they select a site of 20 acres out on the pitch of Cape Fear, think the modern day Bald Head Island Conservancy, they also identified a right-of-way where they could lay a tramway line connecting the 20-acre site out on the eastern end of Bald Head Island towards the Cape with the Cape Fear River along the western end of the island. So they're laying plans here that they are going to create a tramway from the western end of the island at the river to the eastern end of the island at the Cape, and that is how, through this tramway, through cars pulled by animals, that they are going to get all these supplies 3.5 miles across the jungle of Bald Head Island to the construction site. All right? So things are moving in 1899. Good morning, Phil. It's great to hear from you. We miss you over here on Bald Head. Phil is one of our excellent volunteers who donates a lot of time and energies to our mission. So we're looking forward to the day that Phil can come back over and join us. So Phil, I hope all is well, and I will see you at our board meeting tonight. We are all becoming professionals at Zoom board meetings. Fun times, everybody. So by 1900, things are progressing even further. They say that in September of 1898, they selected the site. The site was approved. $4,000 was paid to select or purchase that site. Who, you might ask, owned Bald Head Island at this point? It was heirs to the Walker family. John Walker had inherited Bald Head Island, or much of Bald Head Island, after Benjamin Smith in the 1820s. I think Benjamin Smith died in 1826. Don't hold me to that, but right about there. So the John Walker family inherits Bald Head Island after that. And John Walker, curious enough, is the individual that not only, or not his individual, the Walker family, I should say, many of his heirs, they are the ones who not only end up giving up land to build Cape Fear Light Station, but also the Life-Saving Service Station. And one of the curious things in our archives is we have the original lease or contract to give up some land along East Beach to establish that first Life-Saving Service Station from the Walker family. So clearly they get $4,000 for these 20 acres on the island. And things we're moving along, all right? So it says, preparations for the establishment of the station will be commenced. We are moving forward, folks, in the year 1900. Barry, really enjoy these, Travis. Thanks watching on the island. Well, Barry, thank you very much for tuning in to us. I hope you're going to enjoy your day, because let me tell you, folks, it is night and day from yesterday. Yesterday was cold and windy and rainy and awful, and today the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It is a beautiful day on Bald Head Island. All right, so 1900, they eventually are appropriating the additional $35,000 to bring it up to $70,000. And they say that the contract was paid, and in April 1901, the contract was entered into. By 1901, they say the work of the tower is being prosecuted. A few castings have been made, but delay has been occasioned in the consequence of the workmen's strike. Work is about to begin at the site on Smith Island. So clearly some Labor disputes are slowing down the construction of Cape Fear Light Station. And I want to just discuss what are the biggest differences between Cape Fear Light Station and Old Baldy as we know it today. And since we all kind of probably can foreshadow, in 1958 they blow up Cape Fear Light Station, so it doesn't exist anymore. So it's hard for people to conceptualize or think about what it looked like. But remember that Cape Fear Light Station that they're beginning to construct in 1901, they say that castings have been made. It is a skeletal lighthouse. They go with that 150-foot tower that they had wanted even before the American Civil War, but rather than a brick, kind of circular 150-foot tower, Cape Fear Light Station is what we call a skeletal lighthouse, meaning that there was no internal room, there was no masonry. This is simply a wrought iron and steel structure that we'd all consider today looking like a giant power line pole or cell phone tower, if you will. It had 8 legs going around the outside. And then in the center was a small, very, very small, I cannot stress that enough, kind of passageway that you could enter into, and that is where the staircase ascended all 150 feet into the watchroom or the tower up top. And I will post a picture of that in the very future in the comments of that light station. So by 1902, they say that it was stated that in April 1901, a contract for the station was created. The tower's construction has commenced. During the year, about 98% of the castings and the wrought iron and steel required for the tower were cast or delivered, and about 57% of these were machined and fitted. The work, however, was done in such an unsystematic manner that no single series was in condition for the erection. Some work has also been done on the lantern, but in the same unmethodological way. The work at the site progressed more or less satisfactory, though. The wharf, the trestle, the tramway, and the foundation of the tower were completed, and the 3 dwellings, storehouses, and oil houses are all near completion. The work on the tower will not, however, be finished within the time prescribed by the contract, which expires on July the 12th, 1902. It is probable that the work on the site will also be behind time. So they're running behind. Things are not moving smoothly. It seems like they're getting supplies, but it's one piece or another, and they're missing piece C in order to put A and B together. Whoops. But these also do, this Lighthouse report from 1902 gives us some other clues. And if you're familiar with Captain Charlie's Station, some of these will ring a bell. Well, first of all, the wharf, the trestle, the tramway, and the foundation were completed. And of course, that tramway and that trestle is what we know as Federal Road today. Federal Road on Bald Head Island is arguably the only straight road on this entire island, and that is because that was the roadbed for this tramway that they used to get those supplies from the river out towards the foundation of the tower. The 3 dwellings we're speaking of are at Captain Charlie's Station. There are 3 keepers' cottages located near the modern-day Bald Head Island Conservancy. We know that they were darn near completion in 1902. And the storehouse is behind. So when you go up to Captain Charlie's Station, you're going up the hill, and before you are the 3 keepers' cottages. Well, right behind those is a storeroom. It is a 4th building located on that site. Curious enough, there was another storeroom identical to the one that exists today at that site, and it has been unfortunately lost to history. It stood to the left or to the east of that current storeroom. And again, these are the much smaller dwellings that sit behind the 3 keepers' cottages. One of the 2 is with us today. All right. And lastly, the oil house. Today it is known as, it's a burger shack. I can't remember. Mike's Bites is what it's called. Mike's Bites is built in 1902 as the oil house to store all this kerosene that's going to be used to fuel the first order Fresnel lens at the top of Cape Fear Light Station. Today we call it a generator house because these reports begin to tell us in the late 1930s, equipment is arriving at Cape Fear Light Station in order to electrify that station, of course electrified through a gas or diesel powered generator. So we consider today that brick structure on the campus of the Bald Head Island Conservancy as a generator house. But in 1902, when it is constructed, as these reports tell us, it was known as an oil house because that lighthouse was first fueled by oil or a kerosene. They call it mineral oil. We know it today as kerosene. Right? So we're nearing the end of the construction here. In the next year, in 1903. It says, at the date of the last report, it has become evident that the contractor for building this station would not complete it within the time limit of the contract. And it says the work for the lighthouse, Cape Fear Light Station, was finished on June the 3rd, 1903. Not only do they say it was completed, although behind time, they say it was well done and accepted. A first order flashing lens apparatus 360 degrees around, is now being set up in the tower, and the station will soon be ready for service. This is this first order Fresnel lens that was built by a French company in 1872 for a little over $10,000 and shipped to America. Throughout much of the late 19th century, this lens didn't have a home, so the lighthouse establishment would take it out of its boxes and display it at different expositions around America. The most famous being the Centennial Exposition of 1876 in Philadelphia, and it was also in the Trans-Mississippi Exposition in Omaha, Nebraska, and I think about 1898. And in the Buffalo Exposition of the early 20th century up in Buffalo, New York. So 20 million some people saw this first order Fresnel lens, this 6,000 pounds of glass, before it ever arrived in 42 boxes here on Bald Head Island, trammed across the island down Federal Road, and by June of 1903, the Lampus from the 6th District headquarters down in Charleston is beginning to assemble this first order Fresnel lens. And lastly, in 1904, the annual report, it says that the station is completed. The illuminating apparatus, or that first order Fresnel lens, is lit, and this was done on August 31st, 1903, for the first time. And of course, it was none other than Charles Norton Swan, we know him as Captain Charlie, that lights that illuminating apparatus on August 31st, 1903 at sunset, inaugurating a 30-year career at Cape Fear Light Station. So since that light flashed, they did change in that year Old Baldy Lighthouse as a light that was changed from flashing to fixed white, meaning that Old Baldy never flashed after 1903. They make her a fixed white to distinguish her from this brand new sister lighthouse, Cape Fear Light Station, about 3 some miles away. Dan and Emmeline, how did they hoist that lens to the top? Lots of pulleys and lots of rope and cables, Emmeline. Yeah, lots of... so I imagine, although I'm not sure, I do not know exactly the answer to that question. I know somebody that will find the answer to that question, or will have the knowledge, and I will reach out to him. But it is curious. I would imagine that many of the parts, such as the chariot, as we call it, so in order to make this flash, it stood on a chariot of I think it was like 8 brass wheels, chariot wheels, So that pedestal, as we call it, I don't think that was in so many different parts. That would have been hoisted up. Now, as for the lens could be broken down. As it is today in our archives, it's all broken down piece by piece that can be assembled. So I'm not sure, Emmeline and Dan, if they would have assembled it on the bottom, on the ground, and then hoisted it up. But I'm thinking that they, piece by piece, took it up to the top of the lighthouse, which you could carry, and then they assembled it into the watchroom up there. But certainly other parts would have been assembled and hoisted up. But I'll get some better answers on that, Dan and Emmeline. So, snowy day in Pennsylvania. I just saw that. Wow. Ooh. Well, it is not snowy and it is not cold here. It's a beautiful spring day. Thank goodness down here. So yeah, 1904, Cape Fear Light Station has begun operations. So finally, the Lighthouse service has a first order Fresnel lens in this great dark space of the Atlantic seaboard between Cape Lookout and Cape Remain down in South Carolina. Wonderful primary sources. Yes, thank you, McCallie, for further explaining that for Megan. That was a great question for Megan, and I appreciate, McCallie, you following up on that. So, folks, thank you for joining us. We'll bring some more episodes about these reports of the Lighthouse Board. We discussed previously Old Baldy. McCallie and I kind of talked about Old Baldy and her changes through the years by using these reports. Today we discussed the construction of Cape Fear Light Station. In a future episode, we'll go beyond 1904 and discuss the changes to Cape Fear Light Station over the years. And then I also want to talk about some of the river lights and some of the light ships who appear in these reports of the Lighthouse Board and are instrumental in the story of Bald Island. These light ships and these river lights acting in conjunction with Old Baldy Lighthouse and with Cape Fear Light Station here on Bald Island. So as always, we will be back this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Taking you out on this beautiful day on Bald Head Island, and we'll be bringing you a piece of the island's history. Tomorrow we have a special treat. I'm going to have Dawn Taylor on the phone. Dawn Taylor is from up towards Cape Hatteras, and she is the granddaughter of assistant keeper Devaney Jeanette. He is an assistant lighthouse keeper at Cape Fear Light Station, who dies in the watchroom in December of 1932, dying in Captain Charlie's arms from some health problems. So Miss Taylor, she has all kinds of great resources and pictures that she is going to be sharing with us, and we will talk about her ancestor and his contributions to the Lighthouse service here on Bald Head Island. So you do not want to miss that episode tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Dawn Taylor's a great friend, and she's a great supporter of Old Baldy Lighthouse, and we're very fortunate, we're very excited that she can give us a few minutes of her time to talk about a very horrific event here on Bald Head Island that was significant into the story of this barrier island. So we will see you this afternoon, folks. Thank you for joining us. You all stay healthy. You stay positive out there. Continually social distance. Seems like all our endeavors are working. We're getting the better of this. And we'll all be together once again very soon. I don't doubt it one bit. So we'll see you next time, folks. Thank you.